Well, hey friends, it's Bob. I am getting ready to stream a live event that I recorded in Springfield, Vermont with the Agency of Natural Resources. And they were doing a presentation on the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And I thought you might find it interesting as well. Don't touch your mouth. So I'm going to check and see if this is streaming okay. Yes, it is. I can see that it is on my other computer. There you go. Don't touch your mouth. Have you washed your hands today? So let's see. I am going to start the video now. Let's see. Is anybody even here? Just checking in down here to see if anybody's watching. Doesn't really matter because this is really about the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with you and we will get started. And there it is. And there's the video, and I'm going to get it started right now.
My name is Tom Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of Southern Windsor County Regional Planning Commission. Peter Gregory is over there, casually dressed. I'm jealous about. He's with Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Planning Commission. I don't know if anyone from Windham Regional Commission is here, but the Regional Planning Commissions have been working with the Agency of Natural Resources on energy planning for a number of years. We started out probably 5 years ago working with towns. Many of you are on energy committees. Work with regional planning commissions to enhance your energy element to your town plan. And regional planning commissions did the same thing, working on trying to have a better understanding of the demands and for energy. One of the things that we found that was glaring in trying to meet the 2050 state energy goal is transportation. Is that we're doing a pretty good job, or we were doing a pretty good job with facilities and the like, but when it came to the transportation sector, we weren't even getting close to trying to meet the goals of 2050. And so this is really exciting that now we're starting to have a public discussion about transportation and what we can do to reduce greenhouse gases. So welcome all, and sorry.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Peter Walk. I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, and I've been the state's lead on the Transportation and Climate Initiative for the last 3 years. I'm joined, you're going to hear from Megan O'Toole, who's an attorney in our agency and program, and then Brian Woods as well, who's one of our technical experts. Really appreciate everybody coming out. This is our third of 4 public meetings around the state where we're introducing the Transportation and Climate Initiative, the work that we've been doing as a state, what it might mean for us, and the kind of conversation that's happening both within the region and around the state as to whether or not this is a policy proposal that the state wants to move forward with. So, as I said, we really want, the goal of this is to get your feedback. We're in the middle of a regional public input period. We're trying to hear from as many people, both from Vermonters, but also the other states are doing the same sort of work to understand the perspectives of their residents around the region. We'll go into what that region actually looks like so you can sort of see the range of folks we're talking about. And then to talk to you about sort of what the timeline is as we move forward and what the next steps are and opportunities for further engagement. We've all lived the extreme weather of recent years and the impacts that a changing climate are having on our communities, on our economy, and our way of life here in Vermont. We feel that strong impetus for action, and we want to make sure that we are moving forward with programs and policies that are helping us get there. As Tom mentioned, transportation emissions represent 44% of our greenhouse gas emissions. The next largest sector is our sort of building energy use, and that's about 27%. We talk a lot about renewable energy. renewable energy, or energy itself, electric energy represents less than 10% of our overall greenhouse gas emissions at this point, and it's going down. We're not making progress in the transportation sector, and we need to if we're gonna reach those goals and really mitigate the worst impacts of our climate crisis. So this is just a history of where we've been in the last less than 10 years. From Irene on, the scale of challenge we faced, and the reason why we as a state are interested in making sure that we're moving forward with action commensurate to the level of the challenge. This yellow line, which is probably a little hard to see from where you are, is our historical greenhouse gas emissions. We start in 1990 as what we sort of consider our baseline year for the most part. In 2007, the legislature set goals of 50% below 1990 levels by 2028 and 75% below by 2050. There was actually a 2012 goal of 25% below, which we flew by and didn't even come close to. We are not likely to make those either, frankly, on our current trajectory. We have, for the first time in recent years, actually gone down slightly in our most recent data. That data is from 2016. It takes a while for the federal government and others to consolidate all the data so we know where we are. So the most recent complete data we have is 2016, but what we have of 2017 and 2018, we see further downticks and are optimistic that we're at least trending in the right direction. We have other goals in the state. The 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 is in the comprehensive energy plan that was done in 2016. There's also an 80% below 1990 levels in the comprehensive energy plan by 2050. And 80 to 95%, so that's the range you see here on the right. As you can see, there's one of those lines does not meet the trend that we need to be on to reach those goals. We also have the governor signaled Vermont's continued support to meet the Vermont's contribution to the U.S. goal for the Paris Climate Accords after the federal government pulled out of or signaled that they were going to pull out. That is a 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. That's what that goal looks like. That one is a little bit easier to get, frankly, but it's not sufficient to get us where we need to be from a scientific standpoint. So this is how all those pieces fit together and where the trajectory we need to be on as we move forward. As I said, transportation represents 44% of Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions as a reflection of where the rest of the country is. Electric generation is still a major player. Transportation has actually taken over around the country as the greatest source of emissions. But in Vermont, it's our primary, and we really need to be focused there. Get it up to make it open.
Good evening, my name is Megan O'Toole. I'm also with the Agency of Natural Resources. I'm going to spend a few minutes just kind of getting into the mechanics of how this program would work. And I want to start off by talking first about a program that we have in place that Vermont participates in right now. It's called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and it's like the TCI mechanism but for emissions from the electricity sector. So the RGGI program, as we call it, right now consists of 9 states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. It was launched a little over 10 years ago, and it's still in existence today. It covers major power plants or electricity generating units, and they're required to buy allowances at auction. And then the revenue that's generated from those auctions is invested in efficiency initiatives or other programs as decided by each state that participates to drive down consumer demand of electricity. So to date, RGGI has been a part in contributing to over 40% reduction in emissions from the electricity sector and has resulted in a lifetime energy bill savings of over $9 million as of 2017. Excuse me, $9 billion.
$9 billion regionally, yeah.
Yes, $9 billion in the region, not Vermont. And Reggie is growing. Pennsylvania has recently made moves to join Reggie, and their governor has directed their energy agency to adopt rules to join Reggie. So we're currently working with them, and then Virginia has adopted rules and hopefully will begin implementing the program within the next 2 years.
We hope to have that by 2021.
Okay. So the TCI region looks a little similar to Reggie. And TCI isn't really a new organization. It's been around for quite a while. The states and TCI have been working since 2010 to address emissions from the transportation sector in the region, and recently have been engaged in regional listening sessions, and then in December 2018, all of the jurisdictions committed to a year-long program, which ended at the end of 2019, to further develop what this regional cap and invest program would look like. The program goals include obviously reducing carbon emissions by utilizing a market-based mechanism to drive down emissions, and then investing the proceeds from the auctions to reduce emissions, increase resiliency, and then provide net economic and social benefits in the region.
Can you take questions now, or would you rather wait?
I think we're gonna wait till the end,
Okay.
if that's okay. Yeah, okay. So just to talk about where we are in the process in a little bit more detail. As I mentioned in in 2019, we released a draft framework that kind of, from a very high level, explained how the program would work. We gathered input on that framework throughout the late fall of last year, and then we released a draft memorandum of understanding in December, which provided a lot more detail about how the program would function, who would be regulated, and details like that. And then we're now working on gathering public input on the draft MOUs, which is this meeting tonight is part of that process. And then we're hoping to begin developing a model rule and finalizing the MOU throughout the rest of this year. And then if that timeline stays on track, hopefully the program would be implemented in 2022. So just kind of digging a little deeper into how Cap and Invest works. So you have an overall cap, which is a limit on the region's carbon dioxide emissions that would be released from the combustion of transportation fuels that are covered under the program. This cap is based on an initial business as usual baseline level, and then the cap is reduced from that level over time. And the way that regulated entities under the program that are kind of emitting under that cap participate is they have to buy allowances that are equal to the amount of carbon dioxide that they emit from the fuels that are covered under the program. Or excuse me, the fuel that they sell that emits the carbon dioxide. And then in order to obtain these allowances, they purchase them at auction. In the Reggie program, we hold 4 auctions a year, so every quarter. And then there's also a secondary market under Reggie where people that hold allowances can trade those allowances as well to make sure that they have enough, they're holding enough allowances to meet their compliance obligation. And then the revenue that is generated from the sale of those allowances is received by the participating states, and then the states can decide as individual states how to invest the proceeds from the sale of those allowances, and ideally that would be to invest in programs that would reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector. So the TCI program would follow that model that I just described. Again, the cap would ensure that reductions would occur and that cap would be lowered over time, but the market, the allowance market itself would determine the cost of the reduction in emissions. Emission reductions would hopefully result from investments and complementary policies that are put in place from the revenue from the sale of allowances. Throughout this entire program, equity has been a very strong theme in terms of determining investment from the revenue generated. And then obviously another focus is, you know, the health benefits that the region would receive from reduction in emissions, and then also the macroeconomic benefits. The program framework has had 12 common themes throughout the process of developing the framework of the program, and then also the MOU. I won't read all of them, but just highlight a few. Obviously, equity is again a top priority. We also focus on, you know, who the regulated entities are going to be, who are the entities that actually have to purchase these allowances in the quarterly auctions, and then, you know, demonstrate compliance with enough allowances equal to the fuel that they sell and the carbon dioxide that fuel emits. Let's see, what else? Investment of proceeds is obviously something that we're focusing on in the public process, and you know, where those investments should be made to see emission reductions, but then also to make sure that we're considering equity in those investments as well, and the different populations and communities that would be affected throughout the state. So again, equity, fundamental tenet of the program. And it'll be addressed by a state-by-state level, recognizing that each state in the program has unique, you know, communities and unique needs, and then also, you know, unique transportation emission issues. So in Vermont, those issues are, you know, definitely affordability and then access to different transportation options. So Brian, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thanks. I'm Brian Woods with the Department of Environmental Conservation. So I'm going to cover some of the things that Megan talked about in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk a little bit about the covered fuels and a little bit about the modeling, the computer modeling of the fuel sector that we're using in order to be able to inform program design. So how it is that we're making choices on how to develop and implement the program. What are the things that, like setting the cap levels and the rate of decline. So this is a view you're all familiar with, so I thought I would start with this. The affected fuels and emissions. The fuels are these on-road transportation fuels, so motor gasoline on the right, and diesel fuel on the left, on-road diesel on the left. It's the fossil fuel portion only. I'm going to talk a little bit about the composition, but it's the fossil portion only of these fuels. It was only for on-road use, so in the diesel section, in the diesel sector, they, you know, that fuels that are used for off-road uses, for agriculture and for construction, for example, are separated out. They're actually dyed, similar also to your heating oil, and it's not taxed in the same way. So that makes it easy to separate, for us to track and separate the on-road diesel from transportation that we're trying to manage with this program from the rest of the fuels. The little sign that you're familiar with says 10% ethanol in gasoline, so that's a biofuel. We're not counting, for the time being, the biofuel portion of either gasoline, which is 10% and maybe go up to 15%, or in diesel, which can be blended up to a 5% level with biodiesel, and regionally I think we are seeing numbers between 3 and 4 right now. We recognize that biofuels are not emission-free, but they, in certain cases, may have lower emission profiles than fossil energy as well. So the states are still considering how it is they're going to treat biofuels going forward, but it's important to recognize that, one, we know they're not zero, but we need to be able to count them in some ways. We want to be able to count the right fuels so that if we are using biofuels as a pathway to compliance, to lower our emissions, that's actually what is going to be happening. It's no surprise to you that virtually 100% of the fuels that we get into that we use in the region come from someplace else. And this is a depiction from the Energy Information Administration that shows the fuel flows coming into New England. It's one of the 7 areas that the federal government uses to be able to track petroleum flows. So I'm going to focus mostly on Vermont, but basically the big picture is we get fuel that comes in from the south by barge or pipeline. It comes in from Canada by tankers here, and it also comes in by rail or truck from either out west and then into terminals, a terminal in Albany. So in Burlington, we are seeing fuel coming in a lot by rail that comes into Burlington for distribution. We are also in Vermont, we receive fuel from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that comes across by tanker truck, some from Portland, Maine, and then also from Canada. There's a fuel terminal that's up in Canada, in Montreal, and folks will go there and bring fuel down to serve the northern part of Vermont. So kind of the big picture of where we get our transportation fuels, and that's important because it informs how it is we are actually going to implement the program and who are the folks that are going to be subject to the regulation. This is the same information without the map, but that shows the same thing. So we have imported crude that comes to refineries. We have refineries outside the region, also inside in Pennsylvania and Delaware and New Jersey have some oil refineries. They refine the crude oil, make gasoline or diesel, and then they move it to bulk storage terminals, and those are those big terminals in those municipal areas that were on the map before. A lot of that gets moved by rail or barge or tanker. And then from there, it gets into your tanker truck and gets delivered to your retail gas station, which you've all seen. So our primary point of regulation is going to be at the bulk fuel storage terminal. So at the terminal in Albany, they have the big tanks, and they have something called a terminal rack. And the trucks pull up, and then the fuel is delivered across the rack to the trucks, and then it goes to the retail station. That fuel is owned before it transfers across the rack by someone that's called, we call a position holder. So basically the person or the entity that owns that fuel. All this motor fuel is taxed in every state, and those volumes are all tracked. And those people, those position holders, need to report that I sold X number of gallons of gasoline to this person and it was going to Vermont. So all this information already exists at that level. And we want to try and regulate the emissions from fuels at the highest possible level. It's more efficient for program operation. These are generally larger operators that have a better capacity to be able to provide us with this information, which, as I said, they're collecting already as well. That will work in most of the cases, but in some cases, and I'll use the Montreal case as an example, it's a little more difficult for us to get information from the position holders at the Montreal terminal. So as a secondary point of regulation, that's this, we would be looking at the folks that are the distributors that are actually bringing the fuel into Vermont as well, or into the TCI region. So again, they know how much fuel they bought, they know how much they are importing into the region and where they're delivering it. Again, all subject to reporting regarding taxes. So we'll be able to capture that information in order to be able to calculate what their emissions would be, and then for them to be able to acquire the allowances that Megan was talking about in order to be able to demonstrate compliance. So that's the folks that we're going to be getting information from and are going to be complying with the program. A little review, the program will set an initial cap on emissions from transportation fuel. I have a figure that shows this better at the next slide too. We have to pick an initial cap in the starting year, 2022. We're looking at the historical 3-year baseline emissions from these motor fuels. There's lots of information that's available to us to be able to do that. And we also have these computer models I was talking about that are able to estimate what emissions would be in 2022 for a starting program. When you start to build a program like this, the first thing you want to know is, so what's the world going to be like if we don't do anything? If the program doesn't exist? What will happen in the absence of this program? And so we have this model that says, if we make assumptions about things like what the price of petroleum is going to be. To actually get that number from the federal government, they do an annual report that projects what the price of fuel and oil is going to be for the next 30 years. We want to know, for example, what vehicles, motor vehicle fuel emission standards are going to be. You may have heard that there's a potential change in those fuel economy standards for cars and light trucks. That might change, that might make them less efficient over time. So those are two important factors that can affect what the business as usual case would be. So under the standard, the regular business as usual assumptions that the federal government uses, and assuming that the federal vehicle standards stay as they had been, so increasing fuel efficiency, we would expect from 2022 to 2032 this 19% reduction in emissions. That's in the absence of this program. But the future might not unfold that way. So we did look at a low, like a high emissions sensitivity. So what happens if gas is cheap, so people buy more? And what happens if the vehicle fuel standards are held or rolled back? So cars don't, the fleet doesn't turn over as fast and cars burn more gasoline. Well, then emissions are going to be higher. And so we projected with this analysis that it might be, under business as usual, we would only get a 6% reduction in emissions in that 10-year period that I talked about. So that's the case without the program. We examined now 3 policy cases. So now this is what, if we added a program, what would that look like? We looked at 3 cases, and that's hard to read, but it's the purple line is a 20% reduction, so the baseline at 19, so a 20% reduction over those 10 years, a 22% reduction, and a 25% reduction in emissions in that 10-year period. And yes, I'm the first one to admit that those look modest, and there's a couple of reasons for that. We don't have ready substitutes for gasoline ready to go. Electricity is certainly getting to be more viable, but there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made before that's like everybody's everyday vehicle choice as well. So there's not ready substitutes like there were for electricity, for renewables, for example, that we had in the RGGI program to work with. So modest reductions could come at higher costs, and the states are very cognizant of that. But what's important to recognize, and why we still have this blue shaded area up here, is that if you're looking at that regular business as usual case, we may only be getting this up to 6% reduction over the time period, but the program locks in those reductions. It sets the cap, and then that's the level of emissions that's going to come from the sector over time. So if the future unfolds where oil is cheap or cars aren't becoming as efficient, we still capture these reductions, and that's an important component of the program. Everybody wants to know, so what's this going to cost me, right? Peter said, we already are paying the costs anyway, but just in a different way. We're not paying them when we buy the gallon of fuel. We're paying them in this, flood recovery, disaster recovery, in costs to the repairs to the electrical system that we see because of these events. So here on the left is the historical variation in gas prices, and it's relative. It's not the absolute price. It's relative to the price in 2019. So in 2019, the relative price is 0. But as you all know, the price of gasoline goes way up and it goes way down, and it's largely out of our control. It's a global market for fuel, and as global events happen, there's shortages, there's surpluses, the price is very, very volatile. We translated the allowance prices that Megan alluded to. We auction the allowances, the market finds the price for what these allowances. We're able to translate those allowance prices into prices that you would see, that we would expect to see, what the model says would be at the fuel pump. So in 2022, at the most modest, at that 20% cap reduction, that purple line at the bottom, we are modeling a 5-cent increase in the price of a gallon of gasoline in 2022. At the out year, it goes up to like 7 cents a gallon. On the high end, the starting price is 15 cents a gallon, and it goes up to 29. Those increases are largely a factor of the way the model looks at money over time. It's the discount rate that we're using in the model. But the takeaway here is that, this is not anticipated to be a costless program, but as compared to the price volatility that people normally see in gasoline, is not meant to be extreme. Peter, do you want to take over from here? Sure. Thanks.
Sure, I want to run in a little more detail on what the anticipated impacts of the program would be. I just want to reiterate one point, that we're doing all this modeling at the regional level. All of these participation in these programs are individual state decisions. So each state is going through the same process right now to decide whether they want to participate. So it's not a foregone conclusion that we or anybody else will participate. And so I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. So we looked at, as Brian said, the 3 different cap scenarios. This goes into a little bit more detail so we can see what those mean. what the allowance price itself, what the auction is going to bear in terms of a price, what the impact is for the price at the pump, the overall sort of regional proceeds, and then in terms of what Vermont might expect to see from those proceeds, and then finally what we anticipate the regional health benefits of those programs being. So I'm going to read out some of them because you probably can't see them super well because the screen's a little small. But from the low end, from a regional proceeds perspective, you're talking about $1.4 billion worth of proceeds, up to the high end in the out year, $6.9 billion. For Vermont, that looks like an $18 to $80 million set of proceeds that can be used for programs to help Vermonters transition to different forms of transportation that uses less greenhouse gas emissions in the process. The other big point is not only does each state determine whether they're going to participate, they determine what they're going to do with those proceeds. So we could put them towards healthcare if we wanted to. We could put them towards anything. The benefits to the program, though, are as we help to reduce demand for transportation fuels and clean up the supply side through the cap. The balance of those creates the best price within the market, enables the compliance costs to come down, and therefore the impacts on everybody to be as low as possible. We may have shared priorities across the jurisdictions. We may commit to working together on different things. We may want to work on sort of EV charging networks across the region or something of that nature. We may have shared priorities, but each of those spending decisions is going to be an individual state's decision. And then I really want to go back to the point that Megan raised multiple times. This is a commitment to engage in meaningful conversations around how do we deal with issues of equity, how do we make sure that this is a program that is benefiting low-income Vermonters, impacting in a positive way rural communities who don't have access to other options for transportation at this moment. We've heard a lot around the state as we've engaged with Vermont communities about what people are interested in those proceeds going towards. Well, first and foremost, we hear, is it possible to use those proceeds to mitigate the impact of the lowest income Vermonters, essentially to provide a rebate in some form? That's an option. We've heard concerns about sort of how do we make sure that we are driving the smart growth that we want to see that ultimately is going to create the towns and villages and communities that we need that enables a low emissions transportation future. Heard a lot about the transition to electric vehicles, about transit and different forms of transit, and how do we maintain that transit system? How do we electrify that transit system? How do we support bike and pedestrian infrastructure? And then how do we look at different ride sharing and other ways in which to share the vehicles that we're using now? Those are all options, along with 1,000 others. That sort of revenue discussion sort of is the tail of this process, because as Brian and Megan mentioned, the program wouldn't anticipate to be launched until 2022. We wouldn't be seeing revenue until then. But it's important to have the conversation once, because if we talk about what it means in balance, then we can understand what the overall cost and benefits of the program. This is another example of sort of, we know that our overall greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals and the cap trajectories that we've talked about aren't perfectly aligned. There are going to need to be other policies out there that exist and programs that help Vermonters transition in order to reach all of our goals. But we want to make sure that there are options on the table, so this is one that we want your input on, and whether or not this makes sense for us as a state. And then going back to where we are now, the key decision point for all of the states will be when the memorandum of understanding, that MOU that we put out, the draft that we're seeking your comment on now, that this conversation is based on, we will seek to finalize that in the spring. And so that is the point at which, as of right now, it's set up for a sort of gubernatorial decision. So the executive branches from each agency, or from each state, have come together to have this conversation. So it's set up right now for a gubernatorial decision in the spring timeframe to decide whether they want to move forward with the implementation of the program. From there, for each individual state, many need additional legislative authority, and everybody will need to have some sort of rule in place. And as Megan alluded to, we use what's known as a model rule. So we come up with the same form of regulation, and then we tailor it to meet our own specific sort of legal setups within each of our states. But that way the rules are the same for each state's individual program. And then we would be seeking to implement that program by 2022. There's a really important way in which we are collecting feedback on the program. It is, there's a regional stakeholder engagement platform where you can provide your comments. I would say dozens, if not hundreds of Vermonters have commented already. We've gotten really good input, and we hope that you will continue to do that. It says by Friday, February 28th, but the reality is there's no hard deadline to that. We'll be reviewing and taking input throughout the whole process and have been, so we welcome your input. And then we also have our own in-state website where you're happy to come and get some additional information and get our contact information if you'd like to ask us individual questions. To go to sort of who the leads for this has been a multi-agency team event. I'm Peter Walk, Michelle Boomhauer, and Dan Dutcher from the Agency of Transportation, Riley Allen and Phil Peacock from the Public Service Department have been heavily engaged, Ken Jones from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and we have quite a team from A&R who's looking at this, bringing their expertise from previous Reggie experience and other programs. With that, we will take questions.
So that was the presentation from Springfield and with Peter Walk and his team. And I'm not going to play the question and answer section at this point, but I am going to run that at a later time. So if you're interested in that, leave a comment or on the Facebook post, or send me a private message, and I will be sure to alert you as to when that will be available. I hope you enjoyed the video, and leave a question or comment in the comment section below on the Facebook post and let me know what you think. There is still time to submit your comments on this if you're interested. And Peter spoke about that at the very end of the video. So you could check that out and get the contact information. There is a form on their website where you can submit your 2 cents worth. And it's time we step up, I think, and get more engaged with this opportunity to let them know what we're thinking. So that's all for tonight. I am putting together and pulling some of my archived videos to stream. And if you're interested in getting an update on what the playlist is going to look like, send me a private message and I will connect with you. That's all for tonight. And I think we'll just call it quits.